I started, as I said, in literature. That was my first career, in which I really enjoyed it. And it got me involved in things like stories, all kinds. So I got interested in all kinds of stories, got interested in language and the nuances of language, yeah, and and the way people put together their histories and how they invent histories for all kinds of purposes. And that served me when I eventually got into the world of therapy. And I got into something called polarity therapy, which some people know about as a hobby and as a kind of a stress reduction tool, kind of a simple body work, energy body work, and with an exercise program and nutrition. And I really liked it. It really worked for me. And I was lucky enough to meet the founder at one point in 1970, and he was such a powerful, charismatic.
In Europe or?
No, he was in the States.
Oh
Um,
yeah, California.
California, yeah, he came
Uh-huh.
to California. He had his practice, Dr. Randolph Stone, he had his practice in Chicago, but he had been discovered in a way to had a huge career. But a man named Robert Hall, who is a psychiatrist and a gestaltist in California, in Mill Valley, had met him in India and invited him to California. And in 1969, and Dr. Stone was discovered by the alternative therapy community. And that began a whole wave of development. But of course, in 1970, he was ready to retire. He retired in 73. I was lucky enough to sit in on 3 of his workshops, got to know him somewhat personally, and that was really, I hadn't met anybody like him, you know.
Well, what made him so unique? What do you mean about not met anybody like him?
Well, of course, I'd met my academics, I'd met my intellectuals, I'd met artists, I'd met interesting people. And, but he radiated, he had a kind of a, it was 83 when I met him, and, or 80, I guess. And he just radiated something very special, not just a normal charisma, but just a
Huh.
passion and an excitement and a health, if you're talking about health.
Hmm.
He just radiated something. And his ideas also took me in different direction from the ideas of academia and so forth. So, but it was really just a personal kind of ignition process.
Hmm.
And yeah, and then after about 3 years of doing polarity as a hobby, the man who succeeded him, Pierre Panetier, I had organized courses for him and for Dr. Stone, and he invited me to his practice. So I ended up leaving university, and I worked with him for almost 3 years
California.
in Orange, California. And then it was really time for me to go off on my own. And so that started my own kind of, much larger exploration. And so I touched into the world of therapy of California in the 70s and
Mm-hmm.
80s, which was very rich and very fascinating.
Yeah.
So I studied a lot of stuff, tried a lot of things, but the body work at that point was the hands-on work was really what what called me. So craniosacral biodynamics, Franklin Sills was starting to work,
He came to
and
California.
well, no, he was living in California. He was living in Berkeley. He was actually an architect, and but he was doing kind of martial arts a bit and so forth. And
Franklin Sills.
yeah, same guy. Which part of this are you surprised about?
Well, he's this Buddhist guy that lives in England.
Well, yeah, but he has something called a history.
Oh, stop.
So he was an
An
architect.
architect.
Yeah,
I
he's a
never heard that
practicing.
part of
Oh
him.
well, I'm sorry, but he was a practicing architect for a
Wow.
while, and then he also got drawn into, as I said, certain martial arts practices, and I guess qigong and something of that sort, and he developed his interest in Buddhism, of course, which he shared with his wife Maura, who's a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful therapist and
Mm-hmm.
teacher. So Franklin developed. I remember I sat in a couple polarity classes with him where he was a student because he was just learning polarity with Ray Castellino and with Jim Said, and that's where I met Franklin. And Yeah, and so then over time, Franklin started developing his version of cranial,
Mm-hmm.
and so we all got exposed to that. But so I don't know. I was just it was a rich environment back then. So I was studying all kinds of things. But I stayed with the polarity, the cranial, and then in '81, I met Stanley Keleman, and that was my other great discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Stanley's work was just a huge opening for me.
Yeah, I remember the story that you tell in classes, which is it's not how you're feeling, it's how are you doing.
Well, yeah,
How do you do it? How do you organize
yeah,
how you respond to something?
yeah. I mean
Uh-huh.
that was kind of a central piece, a kind of because somatics and a lot of kind of self-awareness techniques were already in place in that during that time. Charlotte Selver and Thomas Hanna with somatics, and there was a lot of going on around rediscovering the body and paying attention to the body and grounding and and embodying was talked about, maybe not as much as now, but there was a whole
Mm-hmm.
movement that way. And he kind of added something that I hadn't heard before, and which was how action is really prior to everything else. And I think most of us are very impressed with our feelings and our emotions and our personal history in terms of events, and we're trying to put it together in terms of our personal family historical context, but it's all about feeling and personal states of being and so forth, which is all part of the game. But he showed me how action was really the body's central concern in forming itself. It's a certain kind of language that he used. And it made so much sense to me. There's so many ideas out there that are really very interesting,
Mm-hmm.
very useful, very effective. But I think every once in a while you find something that resonates with you beyond all these really interesting things. And Kellerman's work resonated with me at a
Mm-hmm.
whole other level, not just intellectual or and um,
And
and so
the
yeah,
how,
and the
right?
how.
The
There
how.
you go, the
Yeah.
how. Yeah, the how of it. And to watch him work was just a marvel. I mean, I've watched a
Oh.
lot of high-end people work, but Stanley had a way of working. Again, I think what I realized over time is, you're just looking for work that resonates so powerfully with who you are.
It's true.
And I think his work took me, showed me a difference between interesting, useful systems that I was working with and something that was just resonated with my being as a work,
Mm-hmm.
both conceptually and then operationally. I got to use myself in the work in a way that's similar to other modalities, but actually had a difference. And I can use myself in the work in support of others in a way that feels so natural and uses all of me. And that I really came to appreciate. And because it's not, as he said, it's not a technique. It's really a way of working with the body's own internal logic and
Mm-hmm.
and forming process.